Good evening, and welcome to the Hero's Breath podcast. I am your ever-smiling host, Matthew Huddle.
And Tom Jasinski.
This is episode 10. We're talking about Atonement with the Father. The recording date is December 25th, 2018.
Oh, wait, wasn't the last recording date?
I think it was. And I think I was wearing a different shirt, too.
It's still not evening. It's only 3.
It just feels longer.
I know.
I wrote 5 pages for this, and Tom was forced to read it all just now. It's actually probably one of the easiest ones to write. It took me like the least amount of time, and it just flew out of me because there's so much that I worked on personally with this, something that I've dealt with for years. Really, please pay attention to this one. Yeah, more than every other, because this is universal to every human being's experience, but it is so nuanced to each and every single individual person that I am actually not going to go into too much personal detail on this one. Not because I'm shy, obviously, but because I don't want to get bogged down in my story this time, because I want you to really be thinking a lot more on your own. In this assessment, atonement is actually the perfect word, because we're dealing with authority. That's what the Father in this title. It's not father as in your literal father. It doesn't have to be male. It doesn't have to be a father. This is all talking about authority, and it's representative of not just authority but also inevitability, because at some point we all have to become the authority. We all have to be the adult. At some point we have to grow up, and when we're bratty teenagers we rebel against authority, but now we have to learn how to bring it into balance in our lives. This is also dealing with the shadow self, or that internal flaw that the hero took with them as they started their journey. I want to shout out our sponsor, the Phi Center. As PHI Center.nyc is the website. They are an integrative holistic practice, specialized in acupuncture, neurofeedback, among other practices, including ancient herbology. They have provided me personally with such wonderful benefits in the mind program itself. That's the neurofeedback system. It's a proprietary system. It's really been my magic elixir. It's been that special aid, the supernatural aid in my journey. So go to the website, phicenter.nyc, check that out, and you get to learn a lot more about that. I also want to shout out James Morano, jamesmorano.com, Morano. He is editing our podcast for us now. The only reason we sound so good in your ears is because of him. He is an audiovisual expert. Check out his website. You can see his portfolio. This is going to be the most emotionally eviscerating moment in the hero journey. Realizing that there are positives or things that we can at least learn from in the most abhorrent circumstances or people that we are connected to, and learning those lessons and really integrating those lessons deep down into us. When we're kids, we're looking at the things our parents do and say, oh, we'll never do that. One of the best examples of this theme was in Star Wars: The Empire Strikes Back. In that film, when Darth Vader tells Luke Skywalker that he's his father, just moments after relieving Luke of his hand, he offered Luke the chance to join him in a coup to usurp the Emperor and rule the galaxy as father and son. It's kind of in the cultural zeitgeist now, so that even when I saw it as a kid, I was like 8, 9 years old, like I kind of knew what was coming because like everybody knows, Vader was Luke's father. There's an old documentary I saw about this, and like they had filmed people's reactions in the theaters, and everyone was like, oh my god, he's his father. It was like Lucas had kept like a tight lid. There was like an alternate script. If people had actually been paying attention to the elements and had understood and appreciated that Lucas wrote this movie to follow the monomyth. He was friends with Campbell at this point, and he was following his analysis to the letter. Everything was already set up for people to realize this. Earlier on in the film, Luke was being trained by Master Yoda on Dagobah. They had passed by this cave, and Luke felt drawn to it. And he said, what's in there? And Yoda replies, only what you take with you. So then Luke starts heading for the cave, and he was arming himself, putting his little belt on, and he says, your weapons, you will not need them. And Luke just kind of shrugs him off because, of course, the 20-something knows a lot more than the guy who's over 900 years old, obviously. So he crawls into this cave, and almost immediately Vader's there, and Luke draws his lightsaber, and then Vader draws his, and they have this quick little duel. Luke beheads him, and the helmet rolls over to Luke, and the face mask pops off, and there's Luke's head smoking inside, looking at him forlorn. When Luke was running off, was in that meditative state, and he saw the future with his friends suffering, he was running off to go help them. and Yoda was trying to like stop him and said, the cave, remember your failure at the cave. I have to admit, I didn't understand what the hell Yoda was talking about. It seemed to me like he won. He defeated the Vader apparition. If you pay attention to Campbell's analysis, you realize that this was all set up to kind of lead the audience into what was coming. It was very rich symbology. Now, I know, Tom, this was like one of your favorite scenes in the entire franchise, wasn't it?
Absolutely. I think I shared that same confusion.
Yeah.
As a child, he defeated Vader. What he thought was Vader. And the way you can interpret it is, well, he also defeated himself, his darker side.
In the real world, boys struggle with their identity, and especially in relation to our fathers. You know, we could all think about times where, like, you know, dad was the enemy, pretty much. We are the echoes of our parents. Their hopes, their dreams, their failures, their sins, they become our baggage, too, as we develop. When we pass that on to our children, it's a lovely cycle that keeps going.
Their programming is passed on to future programming.
But it's not just the programming, it's their actual lives. Like how many, we talked about this before, and Gary Vee talks about it all the time. It's like, how many people go into jobs or go into college because their parents did or didn't? Their issues become our problem.
And their issues stem from
whatever their issue was from their parents.
Exactly. And so I guess that's what I was trying to verify, that where the values are being placed and where those values are stemming from.
I would say 99% of the time not evil or malicious. Speaking as a parent, you're just trying to do the best you can and fuck them up as little as possible.
Yeah.
When Luke's face is seen under the mask, it should have told the audience right then and there that they were about to watch history repeat itself. Because here goes the headstrong Luke, running at his problems, not thinking, swept along by his emotions, exactly the way his father did things, which was clearly stated by Yoda. And all these things are encircled by Yoda telling Luke that what's in the cave is only what you take with you. The audience, I'm sorry, the audience should have known. You should have been paying attention. I'm saying this to everybody over 40. You should have been paying attention. But it eventually set Luke up for his triumph. Because when we next see him in Return of the Jedi, he's a completely different person. He's not this brash young reversion of his father. He's centered. He's got a new hand, which is always nice. And he has confidence that doesn't come from youthful arrogance, but in that of his abilities and that of his closest allies. He stages this huge, complicated, rescue of Han Solo from Jabba the Hutt. He not only accepted his pedigree, something that he once tried to deny and hated. It was always part of him. That's why in that scene, when Vader tells him, I'm your father, he says, that's not true, that's impossible. He says, search your feelings, you know it be true. That line is actually so critical because the Jedi were good at feeling things out and using their feelings in that respect. So once he felt through that, he felt like it was all true because that was his magical ability. But I think on some level he always knew it anyway. And that's what Lucas was alluding to here. We know we are the extension of our parents. We have these uncomfortable truths that we live with all the time, and where they come from and what they are. They can really hold us back, but we have to confront them, as Luke did in Return of the Jedi. They had asked this years ago, and nobody could give me an answer. Why was confronting Vader Luke's ascent into being a Jedi? Did every Jedi have to go swinging a lightsaber at their father? Because you got to remember, in the Old Republic, kids were chosen, just kind of the way...
They never knew their parents.
Right. Some of them did, some of them didn't, depending on what age they were taken. Kind of the way it is in China with, martial artists. They have, people that go around from the government looking for kids with talent, not just in martial arts, but in, music or gymnastics. That's why you have these amazing Olympic medalists coming out of China, is because they've been training since they were 6. They're taken from their village, sent into the government training camps, and then just trained endlessly in just this one thing. So that's kind of the way it was for the Jedi. So what did they have to do before that? It was because this was Luke's shadow self, and it was manifest in his father because up to that point Luke was being exactly like his father. Aunt Beru said to Uncle Owen, he's got too much of his father in him. Uncle Owen said, that's what I'm afraid of. Right. I'm going to flip over to another film, and the following analysis is not mine. This is from the YouTuber Like Stories of Old. I sent you some of his other videos on that book, Warrior, King, Magician, Lover, or something like that. Yeah.
I always confuse that.
I can't get the order right either. Yeah. So, Spider-Man 3 sucked, but... there was really something amazing to take out of it, and Like Stories of Old did a great analysis. He took Spider-Man 3 and analyzed it against the book Facing the Dragon, Confronting Personal and Spiritual Grandiosity by Robert L. Moore. He asserts that Peter Parker's grandiosity was an issue that followed him since the beginning as Spider-Man, and it took all 3 of Sam Raimi's films until the issue was really resolved.
Just to backtrack back to Lucas, there's these things that we tend to know, these shadow selves of ourselves, but oftentimes they're not there in our conscious awareness, but they're always there.
Right. They're just hiding in the shadows.
Absolutely. That's the term. That shadow self lives in that subconscious, and so oftentimes we get these thoughts which are dark. Hey, but that's not me. Someone cuts you off. Oh shit! Like if it was just like, oh man, I could just run him off the road right now, right? Like, oh wait, but that's not Tom. Tom is this nice, kind, gentle individual. Oftentimes we try to suppress it, or we'll repress it, or if we give it expression, it still doesn't address it entirely, because it's still there, and we don't allow these parts of ourselves to actually fully integrated. We constantly deny them. But you know what? We all share them. Yes. That's part of what makes us human. And the problem is we're denying a part of ourselves. And a lot of people who walk around with illness, if we suppress and repress long enough, it's going to manifest itself as a cancer or other physiological, biological issues. Accept that you all have shadow selves. It doesn't make you a bad person. You walk around with so much guilt, right? By accepting that, you acknowledge that it's there, but you don't have to give it life.
When talking about grandiosity, and especially framing it the way Sam Raimi did in Spider-Man 3, he took the subject of evil and boiled it down to its most primordial form. In the video, he juxtaposes it with Harry Osborn as the Green Goblin. Had that like voice, that like schizophrenic voice kind of talking to him from the mask and talking to him from the shadows. That evil was almost given an anthropomorphized yet ephemeral kind of version. It wasn't like a set of circumstances or a philosophy or a government, like in other movies. Evil was coming out of the ether, but out of us, as a separate entity that exists within the psyche, that battles for dominance against our normal self, as Moore stated. And it's very, very ancient understanding. And as like Stories of Old put it, an energetic driving force within us that is separate from the normal human self or ego, and how you relate to it is a determinant for our mental health and overall well-being. The Venom black suit, the symbiote that envelops Peter Parker, is arguably just a mechanism that allows that underlying problem to become manifest. Because it's even said in the movie, it amplifies the energy. And I like that the scientist who did that analysis of the substance was saying, he said energy. Specifically, it was the energy of whatever it was touching. So Peter's energy of grandiosity, this ephemeral force, like Stories of Old said, like the insidiousness of traditional evil that takes root long before you realize its danger, as we were talking about in the last podcast, Peter's grandiosity too is already present before Venom enters the scene.
And to some extent, we also discussed psychedelic medicine, well, plant medicine in general, in the last one. It's not that it's revealing something new.
No, right.
But rather it's allowing for us to see those internal inner workings of the mind and the psyche, and to allow us to actually start to work with them, to start to integrate them, to become aware of them.
It's like we said, it's those insidious things that can like kind of screw us up.
Yeah.
The things that we don't realize are there. So yeah, being able to confront these issues, and yes, psychedelics and other plant medicines allow people that opportunity to really confront those things. To talk about grandiosity specifically, which is going to come up now in future podcasts, so let's make sure we really understand this. Robert Moore says, it means you have larger fantasies and wishes for yourself than your real life experience can support. So they either make you manic, running around trying to keep up with their demands, or they make you depressed, because your desires are so high and unachievable that it soon seems useless trying to do anything at all. Now our egos, which are not us, want us to live out a fantasy where we are the indispensable center of the universe, this great hero that could do all these amazing things, and at the same time you also harbor this self-hatred and fragility, this idea that we suck, and if anyone knew who we really were, nobody would like us, and we'd be cast out as a pariah, because we don't give ourselves enough credit. We don't give ourselves enough space, and that's for a number of reasons, which we'll cover as time goes on. Anything to remind us of our pedestrian place in the universe can kind of trigger that rage, trigger that breakdown. As Dr. Peterson is constantly up against this generation of young quote-unquote adults who think they can fix the world, yet assert the need to have authority to protect them from words.
Whereas Rogan always, like, I love it when he brings this up. We're not allowed to make certain sounds with our mouths anymore. Yeah.
That's exactly it.
I mean, honestly, guys, just like go on Netflix and watch his most recent special, Strange Times. You'll die, because he dives into veganism also. And so it's almost Inception, because like he makes a bit about having to need to explain a joke. You know?
So this is what we're up against. These fragile people who think they can do like all these amazing things, and yet they can't seem to get out the house without having the world around them policed and bubble wrapped. It's the ego that doesn't like to be reminded that it isn't a god.
Yeah.
And reality is very good at doing that. So despite the increasing quantifiable good things on this planet, infant mortality going down, food certainty for poor third world countries going up, and on, the people on it are getting more chaotic and harder to understand. That's the problem. When Moore likens the evil of grandiosity to a dragon in his book, it's perfect, because now let's go back to something mythological, something really primordial. In the Bible, Satan is called the dragon. He's also called the father of the world and the father of the lie, the one who controls the spirit of the air, as Jesus himself said. In the Bible, Satan is set up to be this leader of this failed coup, who is trapped in this previously inconsequential backwater at the edge of a spiral galaxy, trapped on the earth. He had this grandiose sense of importance of himself, that he knew better than God. And he got other angels in the heavenly court to go along with this. And so our world is going to have that toxic air, spirit, energy, influence of it. And at the core of all the problems, it's not like devils going around tripping old ladies and stuff. It's just them being here, just out of phase with our reality. Their influence bleeding into ours and getting that ego inside of us cranked up. The ego is an essential part of our lives.
Absolutely. And
our minds and our understanding and our ability to interact with the world. It's an AI.
Yeah.
So crank up its position in our mind. Then all of a sudden it thinks it's too important. And now you think you're too important because you're believing what's coming through it.
That name, Lucifer, also translates into
light bringer or light bearer.
So, knowledge. He's also a great deceiver. He's playing these two interesting roles.
Two sides of the coin, yeah.
One of those fundamental components of that story of the Garden of Eden is that you have the tree of knowledge. Prior to partaking from the tree of knowledge, Adam and Eve, they're blissfully ignorant, also innocent. They have yet to be exposed to knowledge. They have yet to be exposed to division, distinction, duality. There is no separateness necessarily, right? God was walking among them in the Garden of Eden. There is a sense of oneness between all. You introduce knowledge, you introduce ideas.
Who told you you were naked? How would you even know the fucking concept?
Exactly, right? And so now you suddenly have this division between I and them. Right?
That parietal lobe suddenly got really, really active.
We are actually living currently in a society where the environment is almost built to heat up certain areas.
You know, especially with like social media.
Especially with social media.
I'm very important. Look at me. Watch my story. Watch my story.
It's not like the ego is wholly necessarily bad.
No.
Right? But everything in balance.
It's that push for godlike power, this obsessive belief in our own superiority that turns our inner mechanisms to something, quote, evil.
Right.
And that they get a life of their own in that.
How to understand humility in terms of that grandiosity.
Yeah.
Which I want to let you really like open up and dive into, because I think you did a great job in
much appreciated, my friend. Thank you.
That.
Think about it this way. Here we're going to just take the symbols and the actual effect. We're just going to smash them together. So we're going to say the dragon of grandiosity is the authority of this world, the air that pervades everything, that spirit that's everywhere. That's the authority that we must atone, right? It's in all of us. So now let's frame that up. Our grandiosity is the devil. It's that overemphasized ego and yet self-effacing at the same time. So confronting that dark energy within us and giving it the space to exist. This is as foreign a concept for me as like a good Christian as it is for Luke to accept that Vader's his father. Let's frame up where that falls in your worldview. We're told this is good and that's evil. Simplicity. We don't do simple here. As Peter Moore explains, a really humble person may actually have more trouble with grandiosity than the person who thinks they're really hot stuff. If you get depressed a lot because you think you're worthless, it indicates a mighty struggle with this little god within. So you want to keep the demonic force of grandiosity, the quote, father of the world, in check. We have to do this in relation to our endeavor to live a meaningful life, which requires humility. It's the only energy that's really going to counteract grandiosity. In all mythologies around the world, there's this battle between the bird and the snake. In Hindu mythology, Native American mythology, European. In Eastern mythology, it's the phoenix and the dragon. Mm-hmm. And these themes come up everywhere. So if you think about humility as that phoenix constantly taking from the little and bringing to the big, as Jesus said, the first will be last and the last first. These two forces go round and round each other all the time.
It's perspective.
Right.
It's just about how you frame situations. You could be in the same exact position that you're in your life, right? But you can just simply shift your worldview around that. You know, because oftentimes we're driven by that ego self, that part of us that pride seems to thrive on, and that we give fuel to. It's so easy to simply pursue the same task, but do it for the love of doing the task. And that's the simple distinction that you need to make for yourself, you know, where it's no longer, I'm doing this because here is what it's allowing me to feel.
It's not external validation anymore.
Right. You're doing it because it's like going to work and maybe not doing a good job, so that way you can get validated by getting a pay raise or by having the recognition of your colleagues and whatnot. But it's more so because you want to do a good job for the sole sake of wanting to do a good job, because you love to do that.
Well, that's why so many people phone their work in anyways, because if they don't feel rewarded, they're not going to feel stimulated. This is why most people aren't entrepreneurs, as Gary Vee would say. And I like that you bring up everyday things, and I want everyone to just focus on those words for a second, because as Moore states, there is such a thing as humility, however, and we must learn the true humility that consists of two things: knowing your limitations and getting the help you need. It has nothing to do with any ascetic, personal style or being self-effacing.
Right.
It is simply knowing your limitations. So grandiosity is kind of undone in Gandalf's statement that evil is held in check, not by great power, but by the small, everyday deeds performed by ordinary folk. Like Jordan Peterson says, that in order to live a truly meaningful life, we must understand that everything we do has a profound consequence on the world. It's like Eric Draven said in The Crow, believe me, nothing is trivial.
Every little small thing
you
do matters.
Fucking frightening. That's scary. I don't want to think that everything I do matters. I want to watch
it's also
The Voice.
Everything you're not doing that matters. You can choose not to act, but then what are you depriving the world of?
That's such a beautiful thing, and it ties in a little bit with what I've had to work on with this.
Let's talk about grandiosity, only because I think we've all been there.
Yeah.
Right? And I think we all do experience that. In fact, I have to keep that part of myself in check all the time. I grew up so much in my head. I read every type of fiction you can imagine. Fantasy world of myths and dragons. I was a huge Harry Potter fanatic, right? And all of these things where you want to be the hero.
You want to get that letter from Hogwarts.
Hell yeah. You know what? I would honestly so often be reading books, right? And dude, I read every book in the Star Wars universe. I poured through all that shit. Even though I was reading the book, there was always a better hero, and that hero was me. And I would honestly always...
I could have done this better.
I would always implant myself into these stories because I needed to feel that sense of I'm bigger, better, stronger, faster, smarter. I'm better looking than all you motherfuckers.
I can't tell you that I haven't done the same thing.
That's such a strong part of us. I think even in the work we do, in the projects we pursue, there's always that sense of I'm going to make it big because it's going to give me this acclaim and recognition, right? Yeah. And then how often in recent times I found myself noticing that these things come up inside me. And realizing, well, if that's going to be the driving force, I don't want to pursue it for that reason. But that came with a lot of work, right?
Yeah, of
and
course.
a lot of just internal awareness, right? Because just noticing these things is important because it's always there. And it's okay that it's there. It's just part of the human condition. It's endemic in us. You want to, provide for your kids because, X, Y, or Z. It's you do it as a parent because
you take care of your kids not to avoid CPS. You take care of your kids because you love your children. I don't want to say I get pissed off when people tell me I'm a good dad, but it's like, why does the bar have to be so fucking low? Why shouldn't I be a good dad?
Exactly. I like that. I really like that.
You know, it's like, I should be congratulated for not sucking.
We should have that mentality, that approach in everything we do. Here's the thing. If you're doing something out of pride, you're opening yourself up to criticism.
And you're fragile whenever you face it.
Right? Because you're affected by it. Versus if you do things simply because you love to do them, no opinion matters.
Right.
It will not break you. And then you can wholeheartedly pursue what you're doing. And guess what? When you wholeheartedly pursue anything, you're going to fucking succeed and you're going to blow shit away. Like, you're going to do well. And that's what we all need people doing, is not worrying about these other external markers of validation.
I like how you keep bringing it down to things that we're going to do every day. I've worked on this for a long time, as have you. I'm going to work on this every day, and so will you, and so will everyone else. Robert Moore says, remember, there's no such thing as a person who's completely transformed his or her own narcissism. There are only people who acknowledge their grandiose energies and try to learn how to relate to them consciously and regulate and optimize their contacts with them intelligently. They have a power, and it's like I said in the intro video to the YouTube channel, is, I went down, I faced my dragons, and I realized I can use their power for myself. And I was also referring to my mental disorders, like I said, the mind programs help me definitely get better control over them, but it's that song by Hoser, don't ever tame your demons. You just keep them on a leash. The most I really want to say about this right now is that I have a certain measure of success in this regard. And there was no specific moment that I could say, now I have it under control. Our ancestors had this ability to take the different parts of themselves, and through ritual and story, and sometimes through psychedelics and meditation, they could get these parts of themselves into contact with each other in a healthful way. I kind of borrowed from their book. I did some of my own deep meditative and magical practices to get these discordant parts of myself into contact. Of course, that was followed by more prayer and more meditation and more getting to understand. And it was a constant struggle. It was constantly going on. And of course I needed help. And of course I got it. And this sense of greater destiny has pushed me through my worst times, because it always kept me saying, I can't stop here. I'm working at a dead-end job at a law firm, but maybe I'll start a nonprofit. Like, I can't stop here. I've got to do something better. But at the same time, the two-edged sword that it is, it always makes me kind of skip over those small things. Throughout all of this, while I'm dealing with this dragon, and much to her credit, my dear friend Lauren has stuck by me, sometimes closer, sometimes further away. She's unfollowed me on social media, I don't know how many times, to help me see the damage that I was doing to myself and to everyone else by not seeing the value in the mundane, or not accepting it. I had the theory, I wasn't applying it. And she was willing to fight with me and fight for me, sometimes mostly against myself. That dragon of grandiosity. I've had other friends, sometimes they were a sounding board or a way marker, sympathetical ear, philosophical powerhouse. But eventually I was able to kind of see myself clear, and I can't look at a single moment, but I can narrow it down to a single choice. Luke chose to stop fighting his father. That was the moment everything that Emperor Palpatine had set into motion was undone. That's why he was so frustrated. That's why he was lightning Luke slowly to death. If you watch the prequels, Palpatine had been laying these seeds down in Anakin going back decades. Mm-hmm. And everything in the Empire, waiting for all this to come to fruition. And now it was just undone by this kid's choice. Just as Peter had to choose to shed the black suit and then go later to Harry and say, I can't defeat these two bad guys by myself, I need your help. I chose to stop making digs at myself for failing to live up to what I had previously envisioned for myself. That I wasn't going to try to take any more shortcuts. That I knew exactly what I wanted, but I knew I couldn't have it when I wanted, how I wanted. That I had to accept that there was a process to living, and to trust that this gradual shaping of me into the person that I wanted to be had to take its time. That I intended to do great things with my time on this planet, but I learned that it won't be accomplished with the grand bluster of a superhero. It will be achieved by living my life as if the small, everyday deeds of ordinary folk actually mattered, because they do. Especially when it comes to my daughter. Mm-hmm. Those little moments you have with your kid, they're hugely important. So instead of just posting shit online because I felt like it, and fuck you, it's my page, and get off if you don't like it, I started treating what I would put out there, even the things I would like, as if it was going to affect someone. And despite the fact that I don't think people should be as fragile as they are, it's not up to me to determine somebody else's, path and fragility, and to say that maybe I can treat every step I take as important, to know that everything I do matters. We talk about time travel sometimes, in sci-fi, as, the butterfly effect, as a little thing can change the future. People are always talking about, oh, if I go into the past and change one little thing, then my life will be better. It's like, hang on a second. What if you change one little thing right fucking now? What could your future be like? We forget those things. Mm-hmm. We forget that we're traveling through time. And we can take those small little things that we do and to make the choice that the little things matter, that we should invest in those things. And so now you want to talk about humility as counteracting grandiosity. Great. How do you maintain humility? How do you maintain that positive view? This is the one thing, and like I always say, it's like, oh, I use myself as an example, see what you can bounce off of it. This time, I'm flipping the script in this blog. I'm not giving you a lot of my own examples, but I'm telling you one thing you absolutely need to do to maintain humility, to counteract grandiosity, and that is to stay as close to the people in your life, the good people that really matter, those people. A son, a daughter, a mother, a lover, somebody to keep you looking at the little things in life, focusing on them and all their importance, and to realize that's how you're going to move those mountains, is those small moments. And those people will keep you connected to those small moments, will keep you in humility. And grandiosity doesn't stand a chance.
Mic drop. Dude, that was beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Wow, shit. I love that, though, by the way, the example of the butterfly effect. You can make that choice right now. It really just comes down to a matter of stopping, becoming present, becoming aware. You start small. That's the only place you should ever start, because if you put too big a goal in front of yourself, guess what? You're going to get so easily overwhelmed. You're going to so easily rationalize your way out of things. Start with the smallest, dumbest thing. That way you can't talk yourself out of it. In fact, if you don't do it, shame on you.
Peter Sage gave a good example of that. He said, set yourself up to win. If you need to get to the gym, studies have shown that if your gym bag is ready and it is by your bed, you stand a 30% chance of actually getting to the gym that morning.
Yo, there are people who actually will go to bed in their gym clothes.
Yeah.
So that way they can wake up, and then there is just clear incentive. So it's a matter of, becoming aware of your environment and how to structure your environment to set you up for success. Also, it's just staying grounded. If you look at every great teacher throughout time, humility is a key component. Shit, you're talking about the Son of God, and he was going around in a robe, chilling with prostitutes, giving out sage advice, and washing people's feet for them,
Pharisees were not down with that shit.
That's the beauty of it, right? Because it's having the awareness, like, hey, I'm the Son of God, but so is everyone else. Having that recognition. Basically, the way I want people to expand this outward is everyone's got their own battles they're facing. We're all kind of dealing with the same issues. Having more compassion and being humble. We were talking about Spider-Man earlier and this externalization almost of evil. It recently dawned on me that grandiosity, we're so at one time driven by it, and it feeds the ego so much and it gives us so much fuel, right? But at the same time, we resist it because there is this sort of almost sinful component to it, a stigma, right? And so that gives birth to this internalized sense of guilt that we carry with us all the time. We're all coming into the world, into an environment that's got all this programming, that's designed to just like create all these subconscious like motives for us. Like there's 95 to 98% of our day to day is driven by the subconscious. And so when we make decisions, when we do things that we're not necessarily proud of, well, you know what? It's not your fault entirely. Right? It's
50,000 years of self-preservation instinct.
Right, and yet we carry so much guilt around with us.
Not that you're not devoid of responsibility.
Responsibility is us doing the work internally. That's where the responsibility sets in.
I love that image of, Hans something. It's a picture of a crowd of Germans at a Nazi rally, all hailing Hitler, except for one guy folding his arms. You see, when I kind of squint.
I love that one.
It's like, and it's the circle. It's like, be this guy. But most people aren't going to. 100,000 years of people who did what they had to survive, people who like simple answers, all that simple programming, like you said, is going to make us all hail Hitler too.
And I guess what I'm trying to say here is, hey, first just be gentle with yourselves. So much of the shit that we do, and then acknowledging that others do, it's not entirely on them. You know, they're all. It's also coming and stemming from these places of pain and fear and anger and injustice, and so by acknowledging that, I guess, you know, not allowing yourself to feel so much guilt. If we can externalize it, we can put it outside of ourselves, right? It gives us something to work with. I was recently going through the book Letting Go by David Hawkins, and that book, probably one of the most transformational books I've ever read. Going through some of the ideas and concepts found there, I was finally able to notice a lot of these processes internally for me and also with others. But then I finally realized, like, the true value of Christ. So many of us don't do that deep work, that way you were pointing out, right?
Yeah.
And yet we still need to find ways and mechanisms by which to process these things, because someone walking around with all this guilt, it's destructive. I can't tell you how many people, especially in the Christian community, right, will fall subject to cancer and other forms of disease because there's all this guilt lurking subconsciously for which they themselves condemn themselves for. Here's the problem. A fully loving, all-merciful God never condemns you. He is, by definition, loving you unconditionally. You know who condemns you? You do. You create that guilt. What did Christ do? He told us that he was taking on that guilt for us. We are able to, if we're not able to process it ourselves, if we're not able to do the deep work to actually understand where it's coming from, the deep work to know what these triggers are, what these hidden programs are that drive us towards certain behavior, we're able to now instead, for some, this is why it's so healing, is because we're able to just take it and put it onto something else, external.
But not just anything else, the ideal. The ideal that we know we'll never reach.
Because he's not here to save you from some otherworldly hell. He's not here to mend the connection between you and God. What he's doing is saving you from your own self, right? Because you're the one creating that distance.
Actually, if you go over to heroesbreath.com and if you subscribe to the blog, and you'll see we actually did read a lot word for word out of here today, because there was so much to be taken. Again, not all of it was original. We have the book by Robert Moore, Facing the Dragon, and the assessment of Spider-Man 3 and how it relates to that subject by the YouTuber Like Stories of Old. So I highly recommend both of those, both the book and subscribing to Like Stories of Old on YouTube. Tell them I sent you. If I could be as narcissistic as to ask for that, just leave a comment when you get to that video. But definitely watch it, because it really goes into this in great detail and with great visual aid. To summarize, humility is going to be the only thing to counteract grandiosity. Humility is going to be maintained by staying focused on the small, important things in life, not just what you do, but what you have, and not just by what you have, but who you have, the people you have in your life. And this goes especially to guys. You know, we look to the big things, but we don't always necessarily appreciate the small things. So you want to make sure you're doing that. As Tom said, you want to be as honest with yourself as possible. Understand these energies are within all of us. This tendency to be grandiose is always going to be plaguing us, and something you can't just say, oh, well, I got it. Well, you got to keep getting it. You have to keep making that choice to be as pedestrian and humble as possible through the rest of this journey. And when you hit that moment, that's when everything really starts to change. If you have any questions, of course, or comments, please leave them on either the comment section of the blog or on the YouTube channel.
Part of that humility is you don't have all the answers, and know that that's okay. And be gentle with yourselves. And be gentle with others, because guess what? They don't have all the answers, and they're fucking up, and they're just trying to make things work, and that's what that humility really entails. Acknowledging and becoming more aware of these things is that's where you start. That's where you're able to start to move forward consciously, conscious of the decisions you're making and why you're making them, and the direction in which you want to move yourself forward. Be humble, be gentle with yourselves, and be compassionate with others.
And remember, you're still the hero. Good night, everybody.
Good night.